Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Angelica Cardenas, and I'm a health educator for community health at Atlantic Health System. Today's webinar, Nutrition Strategies for Cancer Prevention, is presented by Emily Perry, oncology dietitian at the Carol G. Simon Cancer Center at Morristown Medical Center. Before we begin, I have a few announcements. Please note this webinar is being recorded. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button for questions or the chat button for comments. We will try our very best to get through all of the questions at the end of the presentation. Understanding your risk for heart disease is essential for maintaining your health and well-being. By answering a few questions in our 2-minute quiz, you'll be able to take proactive steps to protect your health. I will now turn it over to Emily.
Hi, and thank you, Angelica, for the nice introduction. So as the title of the presentation states, today we are going to review nutrition strategies for cancer prevention. And the recommendations that I will review today come mostly from the 2020 American Cancer Society guideline on diet and physical activity for cancer prevention. But I will also tap into some resources that are put forth from the American Institute for Cancer Research for cancer prevention as well, which are recommendations that are based off the World Cancer Research Foundation and the American Institute for Cancer Research systematic reviews, their continuous update projects. And this includes research that maybe has been published since the last publication of the American Cancer Society's guidelines. So those were last published in 2020. So there has been some research that's come out since then that does get pushed forth through some of these other organizations as well. So these guidelines, I also like to highlight, they're consistent with the guidelines that are put forth by the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans for general health promotion. So a lot of the recommendations that we'll review today are not exclusive to cancer prevention. They're also beneficial in helping to prevent heart disease, helping to manage diabetes, and just promote health in general. So I want to just clarify kind of how things are classified based on their risk of causing cancer. The International Agency for Research on Cancer groups various agents based on their carcinogen status. And when we refer to a carcinogen, that's something that causes cancer. It can be a substance like tobacco or asbestos, or something that we ingest like alcohol or processed meats. And it's important to note here that two agents that maybe are in the same category here may not pose the same risk. For example, tobacco is a group 1 carcinogen. It's known to cause cancer in humans. And processed meat is also a group 1 carcinogen. But tobacco smoke is exponentially more likely to cause cancer than eating processed meat. So just to give you an idea of kind of how things are classified on this scale at least. And while the development of some cancer is kind of out of our control, perhaps it's related to our genetic predisposition, our family history, about 40% of cancer cases can be prevented through modifiable risk factors. So there are things that we can do, choose to do or avoid that will reduce our risk of developing cancer over time. About 1 in 5 cancer cases are related to one of the 4 recommendations that I'm going to go through today. So listed here are really the 4 overarching nutrition and physical activity recommendations when it comes to reducing cancer risk. So that includes achieving and maintaining a healthy body weight throughout life, following a healthy eating pattern at all ages, remaining physically active, and avoiding alcohol if possible. And we're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit more detail today. So one of the first recommendations that we're going to review is keeping a healthy body weight and avoiding weight gain as we age into adult life. And that will help to reduce our cancer risk over time. So weight gain, being overweight, and obesity are considered a cause for 13 different types of cancers. Many cancer cases are attributable to overweight or obese status, and that's only second to cigarette smoking. So having excess body weight is definitely increases our risk of cancer over time. Some cancer types, like uterine cancer, gallbladder, liver, kidney, and esophageal cancers, have actually much higher correlations to overweight or obese status. So our risk definitely goes up in certain types of cancer. And the reason why excess body weight increases our risk of cancer um, is related to adipose or fat tissue. So excess body fat contributes to a cancer promoting environment within our body. I mean, it does that by increasing our inflammation levels, increasing oxidative stress, proliferating cells and increasing cells to grow, good and bad cells. It impairs our ability to destroy unhealthy cells or repair healthy cells. And on the contrary, weight loss is associated with a reduced risk of many cancers, especially cancers like breast cancer and endometrial cancer. Um, Weight loss can have beneficial impacts on our cardiovascular health, our diabetes risk, both of which are diseases also that can be linked to cancer as well. So, as a means to achieve and maintain a healthy weight status, there's a little bit of an infographic here that goes through some of the ways that may decrease our risk of being overweight or obese. And then on the bottom, you see some of the things that are more likely to, cause obesity or cause, an increase in our body fat. So, we recommend that people avoid foods and drinks that are most associated with weight gain. So that's things like sugar sweetened beverages, our quote unquote fast foods, a Western style diet. So that's a diet that's high in added sugar, red and processed meats, saturated fats, and instead focusing on something like a Mediterranean diet pattern, which emphasizes fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, healthy fats, lean protein sources. Those are the things that are going to help us achieve and maintain that healthy body weight. So, while physical activity and exercise recommendations are not really within my scope as a registered dietitian, I do want to share the recommendations that are put forth by the American Cancer Society for cancer prevention because it kind of fits, into lifestyle modifications as a whole. So, essentially, the recommendation is to move more and sit less. So, the less time we spend sedentary and the more time we spend active, moving around, the better. And some cancer cases are attributable to physical inactivity. So again, breast cancer, colon cancer, endometrial cancers can be caused by our inactivity overall. And the reason why physical activity can reduce cancer risk is by improved insulin and glucose metabolism, improving our immune function, improving our hormone health, and reducing inflammation and oxidative stress within our bodies. So the same factors of why excess fat tissue tend to contribute to cancer are the ways that physical activity and getting moving can reduce our cancer risk. Physical activity also aids in preventing weight gain. It's associated with lower risk of obesity. So some of the benefit of physical activity on our cancer prevention, is through weight mediation. And I always like to point out some is better than none. If achieving the outlined recommendations here is unattainable to you at this time or ever, any activity is better than none. And I always suggest, doing the activity that is enjoyable to you, right? If you like dancing but hate running and you're more likely to dance, by all means, don't sign yourself up for a running program. That's just going to be probably setting yourself up for failure. So we'll get into a little bit more here on healthy eating patterns. And I want to start with the things that we recommend that are included in somebody's diet in terms to reduce cancer risk. So we know that the impact of nutrition and diet on cancer risk is really multifactorial. There's all sorts of nutrients and foods and eating patterns that can impact our energy balance, our weight, and our body composition, but also how certain foods and their nutrients can impact our biological processes within the body that can maybe protect against cancer development or contribute to cancer development. So, about 5% of cancer cases annually can be attributed directly to a poor diet. So, again, we're talking about a modifiable risk factor. The foods that we're eating on a daily basis really do have the ability to reduce our risk of several cancers. So, the most successful diet plans share very common themes, mostly plant-based foods, right? Including those non-starchy vegetables, whole fruits, whole grains, legumes or beans, nuts and seeds. It includes healthy protein sources, more fish, more poultry. It limits red meats, to an extent, and excludes processed meats really as a whole, and includes unsaturated fats. So our olive oils, our avocados, those types of fats are great for us versus the fat maybe we're getting from fried foods or processed foods where it's been added for flavor. um, and the reason why a healthy diet can reduce our cancer risk is by, again, reducing inflammation, improving our body's insulin response, reducing damage to our body's DNA. It also can improve our gut bacteria. So there's a lot of information floating around out there these days on probiotics and our gut bacteria, which can be, having a healthy gut bacteria environment is definitely beneficial to us in a lot of ways. So that's one of the ways why a healthy diet can reduce our risk of cancer. I want to talk a little bit about dietary fiber, which is definitely important. That's found mostly in plant foods, including legumes or beans, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. This is something that, per the research that's out there today, is considered probably associated with a lower risk of certain cancers, specifically colorectal cancer. It also lowers our likelihood of weight gain, being obese or having, overweight status. And that risk reduction is not demonstrated when you're obtaining fiber from a supplement. So it doesn't mean you can go and grab Benefiber at the store and that's going to give that same risk reduction. Really comes when you're getting fiber from the foods that you're eating rather than a supplement like wheat bran or something like that. We'll talk a little bit about vegetables, which includes beans. And also fruits, which are complex foods, right? They contain lots of vitamins, they contain minerals, they contain fiber, like I spoke about. They also contain substances like carotenoids and flavonoids and other bioactive substances, such as sterols or indols or phenols. These may be words that you've never heard before, but these are all substances in our body that help our cells function their best and prevent cell breakdown or unhealthy cells from proliferating and developing into cancer. When we talk about legumes or beans, we know that they're rich in protein, they're rich in fiber, iron, zinc, potassium, folate. They're low in saturated fat. They have a low glycemic index, which means they'll have a less of a negative impact or rapid impact on our blood sugar levels. So important to include legumes in our diet. Many vegetables and fruits are low in energy, which is calories. They're high in fiber, and also have a high water content, which may increase how full we feel, our satiety, which in turn may decrease how many calories we're taking in over time. And we as a country as a whole have a tendency to overconsume many things, but definitely calories. So the recommendation for cancer risk reduction from the American Cancer Society for fruits and vegetables is 2.5 to 3 cups of vegetables per day and 1.5 to 2 cups of fruits per day. And that depends obviously on your specific energy requirements. Somebody who's maybe 100 pounds and female may have different energy requirements than a 215-pound male. So, that level is a little bit of a gray area. Obviously, the more the merrier, though, when it comes to fruits and vegetables. When we're talking about whole grains, I really like this infographic that I included here in terms of what a whole grain is versus just, a regular standard grain. We're looking at maybe something that's whole grain bread. And I like to point out when we're talking about bread or any grain products that multigrain is not the same as whole grain. You really want to look for something that is whole grain and listed as whole grain and marketed that way. When we're looking at something like brown rice, that would be considered a whole grain. Even popcorn can be considered a whole grain. Corn tortilla or corn-based products are also considered whole grains as well. And when we're looking at a serving, one serving of whole grains is about 30 grams. And that can reduce if we're getting 3 servings of whole grain foods per day, that can reduce your colorectal cancer risk by about 17%. That's a pretty significant risk reduction. We know that in terms of whole grains as well, it definitely makes a difference on our overall fiber intake. And we talk about fiber when we talk about how fast things move through our digestive system, right? So if we're having trouble with bowel movements, we're maybe not having regular bowel movements, the recommendation we always say to people is eat more fiber, right? And we want things to move through our digestive system relatively quickly. We don't want foods sitting there, right? The more that a food or an undigested or underdigested food sits in our digestive tract, the more likely it is to cause damage, right? So we want foods to move slow enough that we're absorbing the nutrients from them, but not so slow that it allows damage to our gut. So that's where fiber really comes into play. And fiber, like I said, is really included in all of these foods that we have listed here. So our fruits, our vegetables, our whole grains, our beans, our legumes, our nuts, our seeds, all really good sources of fiber. Now, on the contrary, I want to talk about some of the foods that we maybe want to avoid or limit in our diet. So a healthy eating pattern limits or does not include things like red and processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, and highly processed foods and refined grain products. So I'll get into that. We know that processed meat is a group 1 known carcinogen. We know that consuming processed meat causes cancer. And when we talk about processed meat, we talk about things that are cured. They're smoked, they're salted, they're fermented. These are the types of processes that enhance flavor, right? So we talk about our bacon, sausage, ham, bologna, hot dogs, deli meats, all are considered processed meats. And the mechanism of how that contributes to our cancer risk is through compounds known as nitrates or nitrites, which do contribute to oxidative damage within our body, and they can lead to cell breakdown that contributes to cancer development. Then we also talk a little bit about red meat here. Red meat does not fall into that same category. It's actually a group 2A or probable carcinogen. It has the potential to cause cancer. When we talk about red meat, we're talking about beef, veal, pork, lamb. And the recommendation for red meat is to limit to 18 ounces a week or less. So that can be split into different, portions, obviously, throughout the week. There are, I like to point out, benefits of red meat, obviously protein, iron, B vitamins, things like that in red meat that are important, obviously. So not necessarily to cut red meat out completely, but when we're looking at maybe our dietary protein sources, we can look to alternatives. So how much, is safe, or we think about how risky is it to eat processed foods? How risky is it to eat too much red meat? our risk of colon cancer increases 23% with each additional serving of processed meat. And that is, again, a very significant increase. Um, so something to consider now on the infographic here that I have, swapping out for red and processed meat, things like almonds, black beans, chickpeas, tofu, edamame, nuts, walnuts especially, all are good sources of protein or plant-based protein, I should say, and also great sources of fiber, which we talked about. Now, I don't want to avoid talking, about some of the other bullet points here. Obviously, when we're talking about sugar-sweetened beverages, our recommendation is to limit sugar-sweetened beverages entirely, right? We want to focus on water and unsweetened beverages. Added sugar definitely is associated with the risk of weight gain, being overweight, having obesity. The dietary guidelines recommend limiting our calories from added sugars to less than 10% a day of our energy. So if we're thinking about maybe a 2,000 calorie diet, that's about 50 grams of sugar or added sugar per day. And I would say 5 or 10 years ago, I'm not entirely sure of how long ago, our labels on our processed foods in America have changed to specifically list added sugars, right? So we see our carbohydrates, we see sugar, which may be naturally occurring in a product, maybe if it's coming from fruit or, a carbohydrate type of product. But then we also can see added sugar. So we know that some sugars are added to foods to improve their palatability, to improve their allure to the people, right? To get people to buy them. It's a lot of the times a marketing ploy. So we want to just keep an eye on the added sugars that are included in foods. And I like to point out too that the term processed, when we talk about highly processed foods, processed is a very general term. It can refer to peeling, cutting, freezing foods, which are usually good things, right? They increase the accessibility to foods, they increase the convenience of foods. Having the option to buy a pre-cut food maybe increases our likelihood to consume it, which is a good thing. But there's definitely a spectrum of processing, right? So when we're talking about highly processed foods, we're talking about these industrial processed, grain-based desserts, our Twinkies, our cupcakes. There are ready to heat and eat foods. A lot of snack foods, chips, crackers, candy, things like that. Again, our sugar-sweetened beverages, which just have a lot of ingredients added to make them more palatable. And these highly processed foods are extremely palatable to people. They often do not resemble their original plant or animal sources, right? These are foods that have been so processed, stripped of so many of their nutrients. Sometimes they're refortified, right? Nutrients are added back in to be able to market them a certain way. I think of cereals a lot when we think of this. Many cereals are refined grain products that have been stripped of their natural nutrients, but they've had maybe vitamin D or calcium or things like that added back in so that they can be marketed to us as consumers as a healthy product. So something to consider. And so the recommendation here really is to limit fast foods, limit highly processed foods, more so due to their association with weight gain and excess fat tissue, not because these foods, when we ingest them, go right into our cells and cause cancer, right? So it's something that happens over time. And again, the recommendation instead of red and processed meats is to choose things like fish, poultry, and beans more often than red meat. We want you to avoid processed meats really altogether, or use them sparingly, if at all. And to choose water and unsweetened beverages over sodas and juices and things like that. And then another recommendation that we see from the American Cancer Society surrounds dairy, calcium, vitamin D. The American Cancer Society does not make specific recommendations regarding dairy food consumption. We know that the intake of dairy can decrease our risk of some cancers, but it could contribute to our risk of other cancers. So we look at diet high in calcium in dairy products can lower risk of colorectal or breast cancers, but also high amounts of daily uh, calcium intake can contribute to an increased prostate cancer risk. So the research kind of goes back and forth depending on what type of cancer specifically you are talking about. So the recommended daily amount for calcium that we're ingesting is about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams daily, and that is recommended to come from food, not supplements. The risk of prostate cancers may increase when we're exceeding maybe 2,000 milligrams of daily calcium. And as a reference, 2 cups of milk is about 400 milligrams of calcium. Then when we're looking at vitamin D, the recommendation is to really just avoid deficient levels of vitamin D. And I would say that most Americans do have inadequate vitamin D intake. There are certain populations that are much higher risk of vitamin D deficiency, which would include individuals who maybe have darker skin tones, those who live in northern latitudes like us, those who stay indoors often or don't consume dietary sources of vitamin D. And, this is where maybe supplementing vitamin D can be beneficial for people to try to avoid that deficiency if we're not able to get it from the foods. And there is a relatively low risk of taking a vitamin D supplement, especially if we're keeping it under about 2,000 IUs or international units per day. But like I said, most Americans do have an insufficient vitamin D intake from our food, or especially in the wintertime, are not getting enough vitamin D from the sun. So there is a potential role for vitamin D in preventing things like colorectal cancer specifically. So hopefully more research to come to support that. And then I know this is always a hot topic when we talk about dietary supplements, so I definitely want to just go through this as well. There is no role or no known role for any dietary supplements for cancer prevention. So when we're talking about supplements, we're talking about vitamins, minerals, amino acids or proteins, herbs, botanicals. There's all sorts of supplements out there on the market, and they all come with their own slew of marketing claims and health claims that tell you that they're going to boost your energy and reduce your inflammation and do all these things. And to be quite honest, dietary supplements are not regulated. There is no regulation into how much of a substance a dietary supplement contains. There's no regulation over their marketing. Current laws and regulations really don't guarantee that these products that are sold as dietary supplements actually contain the substances in the quantities claimed on their labels, and that they are free from undeclared substances that may be harmful to us, right? So we're kind of blindly taking these things. They're available over the counter, and we think this is great. This is going to improve my, improve my stamina or my energy levels, and we don't really know if that's true or not. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there. There could be a placebo effect. People tell me all the time that they feel better when they take certain vitamins and minerals. Whether or not that can be proven, the jury's kind of out on that. So we really recommend that you get your vitamins and your minerals and all these great food or properties from foods, right? So food itself works synergistically in our body. The compounds that we find in foods work together to exert their benefit to us. So from eating maybe a bell pepper, which is going to give us lots of vitamin C, that's way more beneficial because it's also coming with a bunch of other vitamins, minerals, fiber, compounds when we're consuming vitamin C from a bell pepper versus taking vitamin C as a dietary supplement, right? So there certainly is a role, perhaps, for dietary supplements. Like I said, if there's a known nutrient deficiency, perhaps your doctor has checked your vitamin D levels and found you to be deficient. There is a role, perhaps, for vitamin D supplementation there. Of course, in specific populations, such as, a pregnant woman, they're usually recommended to take a prenatal vitamin because it contains vitamins that are deficient in a standard diet that, if not consumed, can cause risk to the mom and the developing fetus. Um, we also maybe look to people who have anemia, right? Or iron deficiency. And they might require an iron supplement to prevent that anemia from worsening. Um, and so it just definitely important to note that the nutrients and the antioxidants and things that we're getting from our foods are way more beneficial to us than dietary supplements. I know it is so easy to fall into the marketing out there because it is financed very heavily and they benefit greatly, these companies, from our, us believing them. So to recap, the last two slides, which had a lot, or last four slides, I should say, that had a lot of nutrition heavy information. We're wanting to increase foods that we're eating, like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, plant-based proteins, water, and unsweetened beverages. And we're wanting to limit or, eliminate altogether things like processed foods, refined grains, red and processed meats, and sugar sweetened beverages. And I know that is kind of putting this in a very general light here. So there's obviously a lot more that goes into these recommendations. And I do also want to talk about alcohol. I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation that alcohol, or ethanol, I should say, is a known group 1 carcinogen. That is in the same category as asbestos and tobacco. We know that ethanol, the compound in all alcohol, is a carcinogen. It does cause cancer. And alcohol consumption is the third major modifiable risk cancer, a cancer risk factor after tobacco and excess body weight. So when we're talking about a drink, we're talking about 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, 1.5 ounces of liquor. And these, we know if people do choose to drink, we'd like you to limit it to about 1 drink a day for women and 2 drinks a day for men, right? So just to kind of highlight the risk, we see here on the left side that alcoholic beverages do increase the risk for about 6 different types of cancers. I say about 6 because when we're talking about cancers of our head and neck area, those can be lumped into one type or can be extrapolated into their specifics. So sometimes you'll see that it leads to more types of cancer than just 6, if those are extrapolated. And again, the reason why alcohol causes cancer is because it's damaging our DNA. It's damaging our body's proteins. It's creating oxidative stress. It inhibits our body's ability to repair damage. It also can lead to malabsorption, right? So if we're drinking more alcohol than is recommended, our body struggles to absorb vitamins and minerals from the food that we're eating. So that can be a risk as well. Usually alcohol intake does increase our estrogen levels. So for any hormone-driven cancers, like breast cancers or gynecologic cancers that are hormone-driven, alcohol can certainly contribute to those as well. We're looking at a much greater percentage. If you notice the cancers that are listed here, we're looking at more cancers that are within the digestive tract, right? So ethanol is a really irritating substance. Sometimes, you think back to if you take a shot of liquor, it burns. And it's very irritating, not just to your mouth or your mucus lining in your, that you feel, but it burns all the way down and it can really degrade our mucus lining and our stomach. And it's really detrimental to our health and definitely our cancer risk as well. And I like to reiterate, all alcohol, regardless of the type, beer, wine, liquor, contains ethanol. And that is the cancer-causing compound that's in an alcoholic beverage. So people ask me all the time, what about red wine? I heard it's part of the Mediterranean diet. You know what? If you want to drink red wine, again, I would stick within that 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men at most. And I want to just put this slide up here because I know there's a lot of topics related to nutrition and cancer prevention or cancer risk that we are not going to get to today. There are a whole slew of things we see in the media and in, up and coming research. One that I will touch on because it just came out very recently is red dye 3, which was recently banned by the FDA. And it was done so out of precaution, as it was found to cause cancer in animal studies, so in rats. So they were giving them mega doses of red dye 3 and finding that it was leading to cancer in these animal studies. There is no evidence that exists in humans that can, replicate those studies. So, obviously not to be so concerned about these things, but we look at that IARC list, that carcinogens list. There are no food dyes on that. There are no food colorings on that are known to be carcinogenic at this time. So maybe just to put that at ease a little bit, I will point out that you will not find red dye 3 in fresh fruits and vegetables, in whole grains, in unsweetened beverages, or water, I should say. Some unsweetened beverages may be colored with it. But you will not find these dyes or this type of dye specifically in the foods that we recommend that you're eating. It's more so in our highly processed foods, our sweetened beverages, things that we don't necessarily recommend having anyway. So something to consider.
That is the end of our presentation today. Thank you for joining us, and we kindly ask you to take a few minutes after today's webinar to complete the program survey. There is a link to the survey that has been added to the chat for your convenience. It'll also pop up when we close the meeting. A special thank you to you, Emily, for dedicating your time and your expertise today. If anyone has additional questions or comments, please do send an email to communityhealth@atlantichealth.org. You can also call 1-844-472-8499. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.